This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher, E&P Magazine. Please, if you're listening to this program on a podcast platform of preference, please follow us. Watching on YouTube, below me is a subscribe button. To the right of that thing is a bell. Ring it, smash it, click it. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of this weekly vodcast series dedicated to the news publishing industry, E&P Reports. Matt Pearce, welcome to the program. So you've had a pretty light couple weeks, right? Just out playing golf, relaxing, not doing much?
Well, I don't play golf and I haven't been able to relax. I am a reporter at the Los Angeles Times and the president of the Media Guild of the West. It is a news guild CWA local that represents a lot of journalists in newsrooms in Southern California, Arizona, and Texas. And I assume your audience may or may not know, but we had a very large layoff happen at the Los Angeles Times. We're expected to lose something like a quarter of our colleagues in this reduction in force. This is happening at a time where there are a lot of major cuts happening in newsrooms around the U.S.
You have been busy, haven't you? We're going to chat about what's going on at the LA Times and, of course, the industry in general on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
Matt, you said a mouthful because not only are you representing the Guild for the Los Angeles Times, Dallas Morning News, Arizona Republic, Austin American Statesman, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Phoenix News. That's a lot of journalists. Do you have any idea how many journalists are part of the West, the Western Guild?
I would guess we have about 1,000 members. It's actually a little bit hard to keep track because we're a very new union local. We started when the LA Times unionized in 2018, and then we were part of a much broader wave of journalists and newsrooms across the U.S. who unionized over the last 5 or 6 years.
Let's focus first on the LA Times, if we could. You've been there 11 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I came on as a reporter in November 2012. Started there as a freelancer first. I was on the national desk for 6 years, rolled over to cover the 2020 presidential campaign. Pandemic happened and my predecessor departed and I became president of our guild.
Paper returned to local ownership after 18 years in June of 2018. That's when Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong purchased it. If those that don't know who he was, transplant surgeon, billionaire businessman, bioscientist. He pulled you away from Tronc and he brought on the San Diego Union-Tribune at the same time. I understand when he went into the newsroom then, there were cheers and applause. We have that exact reporting. Am I correct?
Yeah, he was welcomed as a hero when he bought us away from Tronc, as the chain was known at the time. It's now Tribune Publishing. At the time, the Los Angeles Times, a lot of us in the newsroom thought it was in sort of a death spiral under chain ownership. It used to belong to the Chandler family in Los Angeles from its founding, got merged as part of the Tribune chain, the Times Mirror Company. And so under corporate ownership, we just sort of felt the future for the Los Angeles Times slipping away, which is really tragic because this is a very august institution, really distinguished history of journalism, especially since the 1960s. It had at one point, I believe, more than 1,200 journalists in its newsroom, which is massive by today's standards and was also big at the time. And we could tell that, under chain ownership, sort of the world of private equity, there just wasn't really much of a future. All we could see in the future was cuts. The business model was to get more involved in like content chum stuff that just like isn't very appealing to journalists and not to readers either. So Dr. Soon-Shiong came in, bought us up. I think he really had an appreciation for the importance of the institution, and he spent, I believe it's widely reported, half a
$500 million for the purchase of both papers. That's been widely reported. He appointed Norman Pearlstein as the executive editor when he took over. You were okay with that, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a revolution in the newsroom.
Okay.
No, Norm was a well-established, well-known editor who had a record of leading institutions kind of like ours, legacy newsrooms.
A couple of years later, though, it was Kevin Merida, correct?
Merida, yes, correct.
Merida, I'm so sorry, Merida.
Kevin Merida, also another very distinguished leader of kind of legacy news organizations, but he had come most recently from the Undefeated at ESPN, so he had some more modern media experience. And so he just left recently, though, a couple weeks ago, very suddenly with only a couple days notice, and these mass layoffs followed soon after.
There was no publisher in place, correct? No physical publisher, someone who represented church and state equally at the time?
That's correct. And actually, that's been something of a criticism of many of us, including myself. Dr. Soon-Shiong is the chairman of the company, and he has many different heads reporting up to him, but there isn't quite like a relationship the way that you would have at, say, the Washington Post, where you have Jeff Bezos and Fred Ryan, who is the recently departed publisher. And so there's not really like a centralized business decision maker at the company, which, we see as a...
Well, hold on. If I may, you just said the key word there, business. Because a publisher's job, I am a publisher. I wasn't before. I came from the sales side. A publisher's job is to maintain that journalistic integrity while you're looking at the top and bottom line. Who was doing that for you during this time? Who was watching your expense? Do you have any knowledge? I know you weren't the chief editor, but you were part of the environment. Who was keeping an eye on the till? I believe
there are a couple of executives on the business side of the organization who are responsible for a lot of the economic or business decisions, as you might say. Were any
of these people Pulitzer Prize winners, or people understand the journalism side, in your opinion?
Well, if you're asking the leader of a journalism labor union, we think we're the ones who understand the journalism best. No, the chief operating officer is Chris Argentieri, and the president of the organization. He's somebody who's deeply involved in some of these economic decisions. And then another leader named Anna Magzanian, who is also in the revenue development part of the business. I will say that these are not executives that we see frequently in our newsroom or our sort of digital newsroom, Slack, Zoom. They are significantly kept away from us, or they stay away from us in the newsroom.
We would love to interview an editor there now, but we just can't find. Sorry, bad joke. Please forgive me. I know you're going through a massive amount of change right now and stress, but I want to make sure we lay the land now. So this all came out of the blue. It was described in the Hollywood Reporter. They got one of your staffers to call it a drive-by. Tuesday, January 23rd is the magic day. A webinar? Was Dr. Shiong on that webinar physically laying off 20% of the newsroom at the time, or was it someone else in his stead?
If these are the layoff webinars,
yes,
I believe it was our owner. It would have been Human Resources.
Human Resources, basically out of the blue. You didn't see this coming?
Well, I think I feared that something like this would happen. I think when Dr. Soon-Shiong bought the LA Times back in 2018, I think there was a really solid theory of the case for our company, which is that you could try to build revenue based on building up digital subscriptions, and that would be a good reason to spend.
Say that again.
Since he has for several years.
Okay, I know you can't speak exactly for what was in his brain, but the message and the mission was to build revenue through digital subscriptions. We know for a fact that part of the sales force was laid off during this time, but they weren't unionized, so didn't get a lot of buzz, right?
I can't speak for them because we don't represent them, and so I'm not knowledgeable about their working conditions. But no, the overall strategy of the business, not totally, but in large part, was to pursue digital subscriptions at the time, and that was the bet of much of the news industry in that era.
Generate millions and millions of dollars by doing quality journalism and the readers will come. I'm not being negative. I'm just saying that's pretty much what
That
we
is the
reported
theory.
on.
Yeah.
That was it. You had the resources, you had the cash, you had an owner that was just into the idea of winning those potential Pulitzers, and you guys started really cranking out the stuff. We reported extensively about, what was it, Delos brand? We were Delos, and that was a big deal. We had that as one of our major stories. We were interviewing. You guys were becoming like the what we call the news publisher to watch, and all this was going on, and no publisher in place. Now, you didn't see this coming, and suddenly the layoffs happened. We, through our reporting, and again, it's hard to find someone to talk to. A lot of those layoffs, it was first in, first out, right? That's the union policy, correct? So the newer hires were the first to go. Is that right?
Yes, with a big asterisk. We do have a generally seniority-based system, but the company can choose which job classifications it wants to cut in, and then it does get a substantial amount of freedom to sort of pick and choose which people it wants to lay off. So, for example, we had 94 guild members who were targeted for layoff in this round, but the company also was able to use 54 skips. That's sort of an informal term from people who could be exempted from seniority order. So management had quite a bit of latitude to pick and choose quite a few colleagues who were more junior and got to be exempted from the normal, last in, first out rules. And so it's basically seniority order, but the company does get some flexibility in how it does it.
When you do a first in, first out, senior management that's left isn't that diverse. Would you agree or disagree to that?
No, I think that's generally speaking the case, though it's not kind of the whole story. Because, for example, if you look at our newsroom, and I am just speaking for the rank and file, me and my coworkers, people who have been around the organization for a long time, who may have been hired in the 80s, 90s, or even the 2000s, tend to be proportionally more likely to be white. And if you look at more recent hires, they tend to be more likely to be people of color. And this is something that, like, we all want. I think we all want a newsroom that actually reflects our community.
I'm not. I've never run a union shop. I've never been in a union shop. When you are part of those negotiations, how much leverage can you pull? Can you say anything? Do anything? So you did a walkout. Is that what you do? I mean, what else can you do?
We went on strike, and we think that strike saved dozens of jobs. The company had represented to us that the layoff was going to be much larger than it ended up being. And so we exercised our power, and I think that had a positive impact for preserving the size of our newsroom. The other thing that we demanded was a buyout program. Like every single union in the world, no one wants a layoff. Like no one wants to have an involuntary separation. We all want buyouts, and the company very much did not want to offer a buyout program like the Washington Post did, which had to cut 240 jobs from that newsroom and managed to accomplish that completely through buyouts without a single layoff. And the LA Times did not want to do that, and that was a choice.
All right, two final topics, questions, what have you, because I know you've got a busy day. Getting this interview was tough, and I really appreciate your time. So I asked you, I remember I said to you, even if you're like in your car driving, please give us this 20 minutes. First thing, what say you to a Mike Reed who's been on this show? What do you say to management today in this, but who's now screaming at the top of their lungs, it's hard enough for us to find money. It's hard enough for us to do journalism in this wacky world where Google and Facebook are taking 70% of our revenues off the table, where we've got massive disruption going on. What do you say to say it's okay for us to have a collective system in the newsroom? Please, you have the microphone.
I think Mike Reed should resign. I think he's run that company extremely poorly, and I think he has been cruel to his workers at the bargaining table. And this includes a couple of my units, the Desert Sun, Arizona Republic, and Austin American Statesman. We have several Gannett shops in my local, and I have to say that Gannett is probably by far the worst employer to negotiate with. And I think they do so at the peril of their own company. They waste an enormous amount of time and energy and money on their own lawyers to avoid getting into collective bargaining agreements and engaging in unfair labor practices. And I think what Gannett has gotten out all of that is a bad deal. It has been a poorly performing company, and my members have suffered because of it. So for Mike Reed specifically, I think he should resign. I think Gannett can do better. For all the other executives, look, we're not going to have a news business without media executives. And I think you'll actually find quite a broad array of opinion among them about negotiating with their respective guilds. I mean, it's not really their choice whether there's a union in their newsroom or not. And many of them have actually fought fairly aggressively against our unions forming, including at the LA Times in 2018 before Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong showed up. At the same time, there are many other publishers and executives who have granted voluntary recognitions to their workers when they've decided to form a union and associate with the News Guild or some other media union. And I think that's a really wise decision. And collective bargaining is always tough, even at the sort of nicest, friendliest workplaces. It's just the differences between workers and management have to get hashed out at the table. And that's just part of the process. And it isn't personal, it's business. But I think that there have been a lot of executives who have made a lot of serious mistakes about how they treat their own workers that have compounded the many problems that this business faces.
Second topic I want to address to you, and you may not have an answer, but it's something that I'm personally going to add to this program, is we have been tracking and reporting on the millionaires and billionaires who have gotten into our industry. And initially, as you know, as you actually said, there was cheers in the newsroom. Thank you for someone coming in to help us support the need for journalism. One of the only industry that's mentioned in the Constitution. I mean, that final check on power, that Madisonian necessity. We had Stuart Bainham on the, you know, Stuart was the one who started the Baltimore Sun, right?
Yes.
And we had his second in command, the publisher, the CEO of the Baltimore Sun, Imtiaz Patel, on. And Imtiaz comes from the business side. Do you follow? I mean, I actually had him on a stage at a conference. I was doing this TED Talk thing. And he said, I got in trouble yesterday. I said, why, sir? He said, I fired someone and someone said, you can't do that. We're a nonprofit. He said, well, I am now. In other words, this is a theory that these billionaires come in, are they really understanding that there's a business side to media that has to be looked at as well? Or are they listening to an idea? This is my theory, and maybe you don't even want to contribute to it. And I may even edit this out, but it's been bugging me. Are they listening to a side where they say, just give me the resources that do a lot of journalism and I'll get you those readers to pay for it, without supporting the advertising and marketing side that is so necessary in today's world to support a newsroom? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I wouldn't generalize because I think each circumstance can be a little bit different. Not every billionaire is created the same. I mean, if you look at somebody like Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, in terms of wealth, he may be the wealthiest person in LA, but he is also in terms of wealth much closer to me than to Jeff Bezos in terms of what's in his bank account. So I try to be careful about making too many generalizations about what's going on.
But everybody else is. You're reading the opinions coming out now. I mean, because it's all
everybody else is, but we're journalists and we have to be better. So I choose to be careful with my words. No, I think at the LA Times, you know, one thing that you cannot fault Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong for is for not writing checks. He has very heavily subsidized the newsroom, hired a lot of great journalists, hired a lot of great leaders. Personally, I think we had an underinvestment in the business side. That's not a part of the business that I represent or speak for. But yes, I think that actually modern newsrooms, especially the modern newsroom the size of the LA Times, requires a lot of infrastructure around the journalism, especially when it comes to trying to navigate the internet and platforms like, you know, Google, Facebook, TikTok, newsletters, podcasts. That stuff requires a lot of work and a lot of support because the environment around us is constantly changing. It's not the good old days of print anymore. Like, it's not stable. It's changing.
Well, it's not the good old days where you write the news people need to know. Someone should be looking at those metrics, right? It takes an audience in order to make money, and a click. I'm not saying you use that as your 100% decision on why you do an enterprise story here, but shouldn't there be more of that side in a newsroom, in your opinion? I mean, we need to make sure we have an audience that's engaged in order to monetize it.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. But, you know, last week, management laid off one of the data analytics people, one of the only data analytics people we have left in our union. So I personally think that these sorts of people are great and can help provide a lot of information that's useful to newsrooms, because if we're going to fund all this journalism, it'd be nice to know if people are actually reading it. But yeah, you can't just only, and I say this, I want to be clear, I say this as the leader of a labor union that almost exclusively represents journalists. You can't just only spend money on journalists or we will suffer.
You know, sometimes I have trouble finding the pull quote. Thank you. Matt Pearce. By the way, Matt, I didn't give you all the kudos. You were one of the first national reporters to arrive in Ferguson, right? during the uprising. You chased Hurricane Harvey across Texas. You got quite a. I looked at some of your work, sir. You got ink in your veins too. But Matt Pearce, 11 years at the LA Times, and in the last 3 years, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the 4 years, excuse me, the president of the Media Guild of the West, representing sounds like 1,000+ journalists. We appreciate your time. If someone wants to stay on top of your side of the story and making sure they're seeing your press releases and what the Guild has to say and all this mishmash of media, where do they go? Who do they follow, sir?
Our Guild's website is mediaguildwest.com. My X handle, I guess it's no longer called Twitter, is Matt D. Pearce, and I have Matt D. Pearce on all platforms.
Thank you for your valuable time, sir.